Hey everyone, Sky here to discuss The Shawshank Redemption, starring Tim Robbins, Morgan Freeman, Bob Gunton, William Sadler, Clancy Brown, Gail Bellows, and James Whitmore, and directed by Frank Darabont. Now, why am I doing The Shawshank Redemption? It's not for Stephen King reasons, it's for the director reasons, Frank Darabont, who's the director of this, The Green Mile, The Majestic, and The Mist, which will be the movies I'll be covering in this retrospective. So, what do I think of Shawshank Redemption? I did see this movie like maybe a few times before this review, and I remember really liking it. Let's see if it remains true this time. Let's get into it. In 1947, Andy Dufresne, I don't know if I'm saying that right, please forgive me, played by Tim Robbins, is sentenced to prison for murdering his wife and her lover because there's no death penalty in the state of Maine back in 1947, which is where the movie takes place. He is given 2 consecutive life sentences as he's sent to the Shawshank prison, and the cinematography is really well done in this movie. We also meet Ellis Boyd Redding, or as he calls himself, Red, played by Morgan Freeman, who's getting his parole rejected as he sells cigarettes for his inmates. As he served 20 years in prison, as the prisoners are excited for some fresh meat to come through the gates, of Shawshank. And the guards are village assholes to these prisoners as they have feelings. And I'm going to say it, I love these prisoners more than the guards because, but don't get me wrong, I do like the guards, but they're village assholes in my opinion. Andy meets Warden Norton, played by Bob Gunton, and Captain Hadley, played by Clancy Brown. And this is a terrific, beautiful story about friendship in a prison, which I'll get to later on in the narration by Morgan Freeman. Is rather spectacular, and a prison is a scary place for anybody's first month in general. Andy gets his first prison meal, and there's a worm in the meal, and he gives it to an old man named Brooks Hatlin, played by James Whitmore, as he feeds it to his pet bird, as he's introduced to Boggs, as he picks on him, and Andy asks Red for a rock hammer for a damn good reason I'll get to at the end of the movie. And he's liking Andy from the start of when they first met. And Red helps Andy out with the rock hammer because Red has his ways. Meanwhile, Boggs and his goons beat up Andy as he doesn't snitch at them. But he fights back, and sometimes he's successful and sometimes not really. Andy and Red mop up on the top of a building, and Andy goes up to Hadley and talks to him about his taxes as he was a banker and how he can help them out with trade of the prisoners getting a beer each prisoner, which was a very good scene as it's well acted, just like this whole movie as it's very well made for a Stephen King movie. But this is a drama more than a horror movie, as it does a fantastic job at making us really like these characters. The prisoners watch a movie that was filmed in the 1930s, it looked like, maybe 1940s, as Andy asks for Red for a poster of Rita Hayworth, and Andy gets attacked by Boggs and his goons beat him up with an inch of his life as Boggs spends the night in a quiet room and he gets back on his cage, and gets beat up by Captain Hadley and another guard, and Boggs will never walk again. And the writing in this movie is very good. Andy gets a visit from the warden as the guards think something is up with Andy, as he gets assigned with Brooks in the library because he doesn't like working in the laundry room. And one of the guards, named Deacons, talks with Andy about his kid's future going to go to Harvard University, and he suggests to the warden to get a load of books at the warden, and the warden writes a letter and helps paying the guards taxes as well as some baseball players, which is inspiring. Brooks gets a knife on Hayward's neck, and Hayward is played by William Sadler as Brooks gets his parole out of Shawshank, and he'll miss the library. And again, the movie is very inspiring and to not to go to prison, but if you are in prison, be nice to one another, which doesn't sound realistic, I get that, but it's true in life in general. Brooks gets out and gets himself an apartment and a job at a grocery store and writes a letter to his fellow inmates, and he hangs himself, which makes me feel bad for him because he was a lovable character, and that's great filmmaking by Frank Darabont. The government gives the Shawshank prison a lot of books and creates a library of their own, and it took them 6 years to get them here, and finds a record and plays it from the warden's office. And I really like this scene, as it's one of my two favorite scenes because it's beautiful to watch as he's locked out of the guards. Red gets his parole rejected once again as Andy gives him a harmonica. And this is what I mean when I say earlier that this movie is about friendship in a prison. And it's a beautiful description of the movie as Andy gets a poster of Marilyn Monroe on his wall. And Andy makes the library he wanted as he asked by writing 2 letters a week in order to get $500. And you know what? I'm loving this movie as anybody doesn't find it that obvious. We get a new guy named Tommy, whom I'm really liking immediately, as Andy teaches him, or they like him too, I'll say that much. And Andy teaches him reading his ABCs and writing, and at one scene he gives up on Andy as he feels bad about it, and tells them a story about how Andy got into prison. And this is working very well as Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman act well together, and their chemistry is gold in my opinion. Tommy passes his learning sessions with Andy as Andy goes to a hall for a month, in the hall for a month, I'll say, and the warden speaks with Tommy, and as the conversation is over, Tommy is shot dead because of what he knows about Andy's story, and the warden says he's tried to escape, which is bullshit, because he was talking with the warden and gets him shot on purpose, as the warden gives another month to think about what happened to Tommy. And what I learned from this scene is the prisoners are good and the guards are evil. And that's good storytelling by writer Frank Darabont, as well as the director himself, that's Frank, with the short story by Stephen King. Andy asks Red if he ever gets out of prison to find something in the Pacific Coast as a favor to him, as Andy is not the same person he was before he went in the hall for a month and is acting rather funny. And as Andy breaks out of prison, this is the second best scene in the movie. After all this time, and everyone doesn't find out until next morning. They find out behind the poster was Andy's way out, and the guards are pissed about it, as the prisoners are happy for him, which was a great choice to know about his escape plan. Until near the end of the movie, I really liked the reveal and of how Andy got the fuck out. The warden and Captain Hadley get arrested by the warden, but the warden shoots himself in the head, and Andy goes through America to get to Fort Hancock, which is where he's going. Red misses his good friend, Andy, and gets parole as he's out of prison by telling the truth on how he feels for his crime, which is a fantastic way for him to get out of prison. He does what Brooks does, which is get the same apartment as Brooks, as working at the same grocery store Brooks worked at, and as he gets a ride to Buxton, where he walks to a wall where there's a black rock and finds an envelope with a letter written to him by Andy and some money in there as well. Red takes a bus to Fort Hancock and at the beach and meet up with Andy, and the climax is absolutely beautiful. It's just great. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 9.4 out of 10. This was one of the greatest movies I've seen in my life. The actors were amazing in their roles, as Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman have great chemistry together. This is very good filmmaking, as well as it's very well done well made, and the acting is tremendous for a Stephen King movie, but it's more of a drama than a horror film. But this is a masterpiece people should see. Such a beautiful movie. So I'll be back next time with The Green Mile, and until then, it's time to get out of prison.